All right, and then I'm gonna hit go live and we'll be going.
Okay, ready.
3, 2. Well, I'm gonna make sure that it's speaker. Okay, here we go. Three.
The next number is two, Jacob.
Yeah, I know. We're live now. It's a morning. That's how things go sometimes with technology, but that's all right. Um, I'm gonna make sure that we're on Facebook. It says we are, so I have
Sure.
every confidence that we are. And if we are, you guys, it's Saturday, April 18, 2026. We're going to have a pretty good conversation here this morning with former Congressman Steve King. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Iowa governor's race, the race for the Republican nomination, just because obviously that's where a lot of the attention is right now, for better or worse. Congressman King, how are you today?
Well, just fine this morning. I got a little fresh air and I'm waiting for it to warm up for spring, but feeling good. I've got my rest from sleep. We should always be at our best in the morning, shouldn't we, after a couple cups of coffee?
Yeah, that should be enough to keep us going or get us going, I guess. Um, you, I guess we'll just start right away. Um, there's a lot of conversation and discussion about who does or doesn't show up to a lot of these events. And obviously, the favorite in the race is Congressman Randy Feenstra, and he hasn't shown up for a whole heck of a lot of events with other candidates. Um, why do you think that is?
Well, of course, I've watched him over the years, and if you go clear back to 2020 when he challenged me in the Republican primary, we did have COVID. The rest of us showed up. Randy did show up in person for one radio debate in Spencer, where we had to stand 12 feet apart, and then we used the same microphone though, even though we had to stand apart. And he carried his notes up to the microphone, and he'd speak from his notes, and the rest of us just answered the question. Then another one he did on Zoom. We all went to the studio down in Des Moines with Dave Price, and he was on Zoom at home looking down at his notes. So I suspect that's a pretty good clue as to why not. And I compared it to the Joe Biden basement campaign, that I'm convinced that his handlers are telling him we need to minimize your exposure to the public and especially the contrast between you and the other candidates. So don't show up. And if there's any wonder about that, we did an event in Sioux Center that was a Sioux County Republicans event. All the other candidates showed up and some congressional candidates too. And Randy was at a bar and grill in Sioux Center, 3 miles away, with maybe 15 or so people there in a more or less, I think, invitation only event. So that's been going on at pizza ranches all over the state. Wherever he shows up, it's whenever there's something going on, you can probably look within a few miles and you'll find Randy at a pizza ranch rather than at the event. And that supposedly is pre-booked and he couldn't change his schedule, which anybody can question that if they choose. I do.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, when he did participate in the debates in that congressional primary, they weren't exactly the smoothest of performances. You mentioned the notes, you mentioned joining via Zoom. If I remember right, it was pretty clear he was looking above his camera, perhaps for cues. Um, but I guess the challenge then for the other candidates is how do they respond? I know there's some feeling that, you know what, until until Randy shows up, none of us should show up. And we should force him out of the closet and smoke him out that way. The problem with that is I compare it to being down 42-7 in a football game and saying, well, we're not going to try to score until the other team tries to score too. Like that doesn't work that way. Whether you like it or not, you're the one who's playing from behind. You're going to have to show up to these things, whether he shows up regardless. Um, I tend to think what they should have done was kind of banded together and say wherever one of us goes, the four of us goes, and the story is constant. Randy doesn't show up, Randy doesn't show up, and we talk about that, and the media picks up on that. I think that's the only way that you can smoke them out, if at all. What do you think?
Well, I think there have been events where there was no comment made whatsoever that Randy wasn't there. But I remember, let's see, Zach Lane, I believe he said this in Sioux Center. He said you have to be present to win. That's pretty clear, but he needs to be called out over and over again. And some of the voices in the leadership of the Republican Party, where's our state party chairman? When you've got a candidate for governor that's hiding from the public, he's not saying a word. We're not hearing this from many of the legislators either, a few, but not many. What this does, it sets the stage for if all that money can buy the seat, can buy the nomination. I will say there is not enough money to buy the governorship if you can't show up. There's no way to be elected as governor of the state of Iowa without facing your Democrat opponent down, or the other, or vice versa, and facing the public, and because they need to see what goes on. I mean, Jesus talked about this. What comes out of your mouth shows what's in your soul. And that's why we have to be public speakers. Eventually, if you talk to the public long enough, we will see into that. We'll understand who we are. That's why we have presidential candidates come to Iowa in the caucus. We look in their eyes, we hear what they have to say, we watch their body language and see where they show up and make a determination on whether we think they're the best person to lead this country. Same goes for governor. And I'm just still amazed that this is I think foolish advice on the part of the consultants. They may cash in their commissions now on up till June 2nd, all the way to November potentially. But that after that, it's over because we get another Democrat governor. And I've been all over the district and actually much of the state, and I've not yet met anybody that had the conviction that Randy Feenstra could beat Rob Sand.
Right. You mentioned the state party chairman. Obviously, it's a party function, a primary, but it's also under Iowa law for certain elements. Obviously, just as an example, you saw what has to happen in order to qualify for the ballot with nomination signatures. So, is it time that we need to put into Iowa code that if there's a competitive prime, and by competitive, I mean more than one person running
Mhm.
statewide, I mean, are we going to have to legislate that the Iowans deserve to hear from both or all candidates on the stage together at one time? Are we that much of a nanny state in the Republican Party that we don't think our ideas are good enough to stand on their own? And we're willing to defend those on stage? Because, as you said, the party isn't putting any pressure on Randy to debate. And let's be honest. Let's just be honest. If Rob Sand had two or three other challengers and he was refusing to debate them, the Republican Party of Iowa would be tweeting about it on a every other day basis.
Hmm.
But
Well,
when our guy doesn't do it, we don't say a word.
that's because he's the chosen candidate from the hierarchy of the Republican Party. I mean, you could see that easily all the way through the establishment candidate. And I don't think that we should legislate that, although it's a good thought to follow down. But the people have to make that decision at the ballot box too. I mean, that's how it'll eventually be there. There was a time when I decided I wouldn't debate the Democrat opponent for the congressional race in 2018. I was way ahead, and I just told people, no, I'm not going to increase his name ID. It's not strategically smart for me to do that. I'm not afraid to debate him, but I made that statement straight up and honest. It's strategic. I'm not going to do it. Looking back on that now, I wish I had. That was one of those things that after all the Republicans piled on me in 2018, it would have been better if I would have just went ahead and debated him. It would have made it harder for them to do that. But just this is a different situation. This is Republicans selecting who we want to be our next governor, and the candidate that we believe can beat Rob Sand. And I think, well, I know that you saw what I put out here yesterday on X.
Mhm.
That and I'll just tell the listeners that I was the guest speaker at a Republican county of Etmahaska County in Oskaloosa a couple nights ago. Maybe what there could have been probably 50, 60 people there, maybe a few more, 70. And and I've been asked to handicap the governor's race, so I went through the candidates with Eddie and Brad and uh, Adam and Zach and Randy, and I worked my way up through that and all, and then I said, well, who do you think is can defeat Rob Sand in debate? Who can take him on a debate? And I heard right away, I heard Sherman, and then I heard Steen, and then I heard Lane, and I looked at him a little bit and I said, did anybody say Feenstra? And the whole room burst out laughing spontaneously. They didn't look at their neighbor to see if it was okay to laugh. They all burst out laughing. There was nobody in there to defend Randy, and there was nobody in there that thought that Randy could face down Rob Sand. That's not a one-off, by the way. At my Sac County Republican Convention back in March, we had, I'd say, 35, 40 people there in the room. Candidates had people there to read their letters. Local candidates were there to speak for themselves, probably 8 or 10 of them. And each one at the end of their presentation got an applause that was, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds long. It was more than just a slight polite. It was a good applause that just said, I'm glad you're engaged in running for office, however this sounds out. And then the chairman picked up a letter and he said, I have a letter here from Randy Feenstra. Does anybody want to read it? And it was utter silence in that room. And so he said, okay, I'll read it. And he read it respectfully. And when we got done, he looked up. No one applauded, not any noise. It was utter silence in that room. So, Sac County is a long ways away from Mahaska County. You put those two things together, one room was utter silence, and the other room was utter laughter. I can't believe this 41% number that Dumas put out is reflective of any kind of solid support. It just looks to me like that's the softest support I've ever seen. And I would remind people that back in 2002, I believe it was, we had might not have been 2002. It was one of those elections. We had the Doug Gross was supposed to run away with a nomination for governor, and instead he ended up with it for by a let's see, what was it, a 200 vote margin in 200 votes above the 35%. He came that close to everybody going to convention, but he didn't win the general. And that we may be that same situation today. I actually don't see how we win the general if Randy's a nominee. And yet the governor's race, the rest of the candidates are actually conservatives. And I saw this happen in my 2020 primary race where we had Feenstra on one side, the known establishment slash Rhino candidate, and then we had what, four or so conservatives in that race, and the conservatives divided the vote, and there's not a lot of competition in the Rhino side of the Republican
Right.
Party. So if you're the only candidate in a primary, and that fits that category of establishment Rhino, it's pretty you can win the nomination, but not have the support of the party.
And that, I mean, a lot of people just lose their minds and say, how can you believe Randy's polling numbers? How can you have the opinion that he's going to win? Because I literally don't know anybody who's going to vote for him. But as you just pointed out, we know, first of all, the grassroots conservative Republicans that we see at the Mahaska County dinner, or that we see in the Sac County caucus, or that we said, like, they're not the average Republican primary voter. Statewide, you don't take that as an offense. That's a compliment. You're exceptional. You know way more than the average person knows. Like, that's not a put down, it just is. And when you have a lane or a wing of the party all to yourself, I mean, there's a reason you weren't challenged by two or three establishment Republicans at a time. When you have that lane all to yourself, plus Randy is from Sioux County, there's going to be a lot of people from Northwest Iowa who would consider themselves to be conservative voters who are going to vote for him just because they know him. Like, it just is. It gets really difficult then to find a way to either keep him under 35%, which I personally don't see as happening because the math just isn't there. And then for somebody else to emerge, they're probably going to have to get 40 to 43%. And I don't know how you do that when you're competing with three other guys that basically have almost a very similar platform on the issues that matter the most.
Well, if there was such a thing as the Iowa patriotism among conservatives, those four guys would sit down and discuss that thing, see if there's one that emerges that could be the leader of the rest. This is a difficult, a dire situation because we're looking at Rob Sand as governor for maybe the rest of his life. Who knows? And one term is not even rational to me. I think it goes beyond that. And so if they would sit down and do that, and if they had to draw lots to see who they're all going to get behind, I would do the grab bag out of the four of them before I'd advance Randy Feenstra because I want a shot at I want to have a conservative at Terrace Hill for as long as we possibly can. That's one of these equations of this thing. But the other one is this, Jacob, that we all know that Bruce Rastetter has selected Randy Feenstra from some time back. I mean, I know that to be fact, and I could sit in a courtroom under oath and nobody could crack that. I've got way too much evidence to that effect and in a history of it. And I know Bruce Rastetter and I know what's going on with that. And the associations he has with some of the darkest figures in the financial world that are part of this and the financial investment that's going into the CO2 pipeline, Summit Carbon Solutions, and the trampling of our constitutional rights to property and the greed to suck all that money out of our public treasury at the expense of the best farmland in the world and their constitutional rights to property, that Bruce Rastetter would run the state of Iowa and much of the upper Midwest for the rest of his life if Randy Feenstra becomes governor. And that's another thing that I just know and I can prove. And I've written about it to a significant degree. So there's some really downsides if Feenstra should win. There's downsides if he should be nominated because he's not going to win. And like I say, I'd pull out of that grab bag of those other four candidates. Of course, I have my leanings on that as it goes. And as we look at them, I mean, first, I want to say some kind words about Eddie Andrews. That I paraphrase Will Rogers when I talk about Eddie, and I say, I've never met a man that didn't like Eddie Andrews, and it's just true. Wherever you go, he's as likable a personality as you'll see in Iowa politics, and he comes out of a neighborhood that should be leaning the other way, and he's won that for the House seat a number of times, and he works hard and long, and I think it's this that people just don't see him as governor. And that's why he's not rising up in the polls any better than that. And raising money isn't working either. And then Brad Sherman, highly principled constitutionalist man. He and Carol have been good friends for a long time. And I've been out to their events out there in eastern Iowa several times. And then, of course, interacting along the way. He was the one that was the strongest in opposing the Satanic statue in the Capitol building that was a kind of a meltdown of system, is the way that worked out. And I think he would take a fight on what's right, regardless of calculating, well, where are the case law precedents. Those things are good. He speaks well about the Constitution, and his foundation as a conservative is rock solid. And yet he hasn't lit up and picked up the momentum. The base he has, he's more than earned. I'll say that. Brad Sherman has more than earned the base that he has. The momentum is just not coming. And then I get to Adam Steen, and I watch that. I'm probably as uneasy about him as anybody on the remaining four, because I have listened to his answers when I've been a panelist questioning him in the debates, and his eminent domain piece wasn't as strong as it needed to be. He wouldn't agree that he would have signed House File 639 had he been the governor. He had never met Bruce Rastetter, which surprises me. If he's there with the governor, Governor Reynolds, for 5 years, I don't know how that doesn't happen. But he said he would sign Senate File 92, which would protect the constitutional rights of ag land only, not anybody else's land, but just farmland. And I don't know if he knew it was in the bill, but I helped write it, and I knew. And then he said that he would, once you got to 95 or 96%, air quotes, be me saying those voluntary signups for easements for that pipeline. Once you got to that, then you should be able to go ahead and build it, which meant go ahead with eminent domain. And I said, what about the other 4 or 5%? What about their rights? And he said, well, that's just the way it goes. That's not a principled answer. That's a pragmatic answer. And I want principle to trump pragmatism, because whenever it goes the other way, you're going to lose some rights along the way. And then I've listened to Zach Lane for quite a long time, and eye to eye for several hours, and taking him down through everything. What at the core of him, it took me a little while to realize at his core, it's about the culture of Iowa. And when he went back and bought the old family farm over at Belle Plaine and restored that house up to, I'll call it circa 1900, and to all of the details that he could find in all the pictures. And they moved their 7 kids into there, and his wife, because he wants his kids to grow up knowing what their heritage is, anchored to the land. And the school that he and his wife set up in Wichita to help kids learn at the pace that they can, rather than the pace of the slowest student in the class. He's got a solid educational foundation that's necessary for Iowa. We're dedicated to it, and we've got a long ways to go to get back to where we were. So all those things are encouraging to me. Is property the property rights, by the way, of Eddie and Brad and Zach are locked down good, and they're the three that I have full confidence in where they would stand on the eminent domain issue. I'll say Zach is in he's anchored in this land in this state of Iowa and in the ag community much deeper than the other candidates, any of the other candidates. That's all good to me. He hasn't spoken very much to the urban part of the state. And I think he's got to penetrate into that if he's going to pick up traction. But there's nothing about his philosophy that's this antithetical to the cities. It just needs to be broadcast into the cities. He needs to contact more there. So I'd like to see them all come together. I don't know if that could possibly happen. It takes an ego to run for governor, and it takes laying your ego aside in order to do what I've just suggested. I point out that Clarence Thomas, my favorite justice in the United States Supreme Court, has a set of hooks outside his office, and the sign under it says "Hang egos here." So that's what I would do if I'm going to bring them together. I put that sign up, say, "Come on, boys, hang them out here, and let's sit down and get real."
You've run campaigns before. There should be some pretty hard and fast data that they can look at, whether it's donors, whether it's volunteer requests, whether it's website hits, whether it's um, just pure signups at events, attendance at events. I mean, there should be things that are concrete that you would remove all bias from, and you should be able to say, let's look at this. Are you on the trajectory that takes you to the nomination?
Hmm.
Correct? Like what are some things that if you were running for governor and you were in their situation, you would be looking at to tell you unbiasedly whether you should be staying in this race or whether you should be considering bowing out of it?
Well, one thing I'd look at is that, of course, everybody looks at the fundraising stream. Who can raise the money? Who has the money and can raise the money to carry this media effort out for the duration of this campaign? And if you look at the standard there now, I don't think there's any question that Feenstra's got the money, and if he doesn't have, they'll put more money in for him. That's I've looked down through the fundraising list for Feenstra's campaign. I'll say his early filings for governor and the congressional campaign. And it's a lot of that is the mirror reflection of the major donors in the state that are controlled by Bruce Rostetter. I'm also the guy that knows that. Um, but watching the other candidates, you go up the line, who's been able to raise the money? Well, it looks like Eddie's had the hardest time. Brad's probably had the next hardest time. And then Steen after that. And Zach Lane is the guy that comes with his money and money that he's raised. And I think he'll be able to stay on TV all the way out to the end. He's been the slow starter on this, though, and I'd like to see that ramped up sooner. The other side of this is that another measure is what about the grassroots? Have they been to all the counties? Have they stopped in at all the radio stations they can? Have they gotten stories in the local newspaper? And the earned media side of that thing. And that's the part I loved. I went to all 382 towns in my congressional district, and I got to meet a lot of people. And it helped me. It helped me understand the culture all across the district and most of Iowa, for that matter. Who's done the best at that? Probably Brad Sherman, but Eddie's been real good at that too. I measure those
Well,
things, and people's reaction is another one.
right.
Who inspires them, and who has the vision to inspire them? Now, that the vision part is the one that is Zach Lane's neighborhood. That he owns the vision. And if I look at the candidates all the way back to all my political life, I've never seen a candidate for governor that has the kind of vision that Zach Lane naturally has. And that can take Iowa to the quote new heights that Feenstra is talking about.
You mentioned showing up to events, and Brad Sherman's got to be getting darn close to 400 at this point. I believe both Brad and Eddie Andrews attended the fundraiser for Lynn Evans last night that was hosted by Kevin Alons, I believe, down in
Oh,
Hinton. Um, and I know tonight there's a forum in Storm Lake hosted by the Buena Vista County Republicans, and I believe Adam Steen, Brad Sherman and Eddie Andrews are going to be the only candidates there. And this comes after, I believe it was just where was it last week where it was just Brad and Eddie who showed up. Oh, the six county event where Eddie had to
mhm.
drive a U-Haul because he hit three deer.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it's if the criticism against Randy is not showing up, and the two candidates that you've kind of mentioned as being the most threatening to Randy aren't showing up consistently either, that has to be a concern less than a month before early voting starts now.
Yeah, it is a concern. And when I look into that, I hear, okay, but off fundraising somewhere doing this. It's not sitting home by the fire. That's a measure of the priorities. I'd rather have a candidate there at every event. And I think of Rick Santorum, who
Mhm.
won the nomination, won the caucus here in Iowa in 2012. He did 385 stops in a presidential run. And I remember him also he went up to about 400 people were in Rock Rapids at a big Republican event, and the room was full, and there was a lady clear back in the back, and Rick Santorum was giving his speech, and yeah, 385 stops, and he pointed to the back of the room, and he said, Margaret, who was from Montgomery County, Red Oak, Iowa, had driven up for that. And Margaret, at that event down in Red Oak, if you hadn't been there, nobody would have been there. And so you have to go out and earn it, and sometimes it doesn't look like it's worth it. But it paid off for Rick Santorum, and it just doesn't seem like it's creating that kind of momentum. And we got involved in Rick Santorum's race too. And Chuck Laudner was my chief of staff, and I gave him leave to take the Chuck truck and drive Santorum all over the place. And we looked at that and thought he's the guy that can actually earn this coming out of Iowa, and that's how it turned out. It was shoe leather and grassroots and a lot of whistle stops. And so it doesn't, I don't, at this point, I don't see that it's paying off the way it should because the fundraising is not going along with it. And Rick had some people that were putting money into his campaign so he could have the time to
Mhm.
hit the state. And I don't think that Zach Lane has that privilege right now. I think he's trying to make sure that he can be on TV and stay on TV.
Yeah. Um, so all that said, these are events that they're missing in the fourth district. I live here. Like, sure, I'm probably biased about this, but if you want to compete with Randy Feenstra in this race for governor, you're not going to do that if you're not second place in the fourth district. Like, there's just too many votes in our district in a Republican primary to finish third and think you're going to compete statewide in this race. Would you agree with that? And then what's your advice to them in terms of missing? I mean, if I were them, I would be camping out in the fourth district for about the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I would just hit everything I possibly could. Because if you don't get second in the fourth district, and that's me conceding the fourth district to Randy, if you don't get second, you're not sniffing the nomination. What are your thoughts on that?
No, that's 100% right. In fact, I don't know where you would pick up the difference of it in anywhere else in the state. I don't know where that is. I guess to strategize for any of these other campaigns, they do need to call Randy out, and there's got to be somebody that goes out into the ads that says we don't want. I'll make it. I put it this way: we want a conservative for governor. We are the Republican Party. We want a governor that reflects the platform, not sometimes the antithesis of the platform. We want a governor that can give us a straight answer on where he would stand on constitutional rights to property. Articulate that. You take an oath to it. You ought to be able to say what it says and what it means to you. So that pressure should come from outside if there's a C4 or a super PAC that wanted to come in and lay this thing out. They're taking some hits like Adam Steen's taking some hits, I think, from the Feenstra camp, but Randy's not taking hits from anywhere. And so that needs to happen. But you're right on the mix of this. And I also think that 41% that's here, that's got to be the top. I don't imagine it's going to be more than that. And I'm guessing about half of that is soft because they haven't seen enough of anybody else to attract them over there. I think it's the softest 41% I've ever seen. And I don't really know exactly what the question was that they asked in that poll either, although it says it's likely primary voters, and they gave the age demographics and the segments on whether they were very conservatives or moderate. But we've got a moderate candidate in the lead. He was what, the chairman of the Rhino caucus in Congress, the Main Street
Yep.
caucus. They're the people that ran ads against me in a primary. They're about dividing the Republican Party, and he rose to the top, the pinnacle of that. He and Randy Johnson, or I mean Dusty Johnson from South
Dakota.
Dakota. So it's a shame that our politics are not driven from the grassroots party when they're commanded from on high. And it's a shame that even though I think a lot of Bobby Kaufman, and I don't have a personality issue with Jeff Kaufman, but that leadership there has been always, I'll say, paving the way for the elitists in the party. And our head and heart needs to be with the grassroots. The elitists can command with their checkbook what they want, and then they turn the governments into being their tool. There's just thinking about the World Economic Forum. They used to say we want to get rid of all of the borders in the world, erase them. Just that way we can transfer labor as fast as we can transfer capital, and we can do business everywhere, and we don't get burdened down with all the regulations of the nation states and the states within them and the counties, etc. I've listened to them make that argument to me with a table of billionaires around me, and but they changed that and they said, no, we really do need government. We need government to do what they that we can't as global businesses. And so I watch that and I see how they're changing laws in North Dakota and South Dakota. They're trying to change laws in Iowa to accommodate Summit Carbon Solutions even after the fact. And I know that that's money and influence. It isn't just the checkbook, it's the checkbook and then the influence that the access that buys and the good old boy network. And that's what I want to see change. We have about 20 Iowa Republican senators that are just locked in around that circle that seems as though Bruce Rastetter is telling them all how to be. You can't get through to their brains. They're just dug in. And they're even saying now, we're going to be personally sued if we don't vote right. That's constitutionally protected speech and debate clause. You don't have to worry about that, or I'd have been sued a lot more than I have been, Jacob.
Yeah. Why do you think Governor Reynolds has been quiet about who she wants to see take the mantle up here after her? I know somebody took a screenshot because she had voted in one of the very early polls that we did on the Iowa Standards Facebook page, and it was her personal profile who had voted. Maybe it was her, maybe it was. I'm not going to pretend to know who runs her personal Facebook page, but why did it? Doesn't it seem like somebody who is so entrenched and wanting to leave a legacy, every politician does, don't doesn't it feel like they should be trying to put their stamp on an heir apparent here?
You would think so. Almost everybody that's got a legacy wants to steer that legacy in continuation of what yours is. I just never really questioned where Reynolds was on this race. I have an image of in my memory that is pretty clear. President Trump came in to do an event down at Drake University, if I remember the right location. There have been a couple of different ones. This was not the one at Drake; it was a different one, but it was in Des Moines. And so this is when they turned the whole political world and media world against me. So we went down there expecting to be seated where you would seat the dean of the Iowa congressional delegation with the leaders of the Republican Party in the state to greet the President of the United States. Well, they met me at the door and steered me over as far away into the corner as it could possibly be in a little old table there, out of reach and nearly out of sight. Well, so I thought, all right, I'll just take this. I'm not going to be whining about it. And but I watched as Kim Reynolds took Randy Feaster by the hand and led him behind the curtain to meet with President Trump before the event. I think she's behind Randy Feenstra. I saw that happen with my own eyes, and but I don't know why she doesn't say so. Maybe she's afraid that her veto for House File 639 will taint his candidacy, just like I believe that Bruce Rastetter is afraid to put a check into Randy Feenstra's actual congressional or gubernatorial campaign because that marks Randy with Rastetter. He's
Yeah.
already marked. We know that. And there's clear records out there. I think the date is April 26, 2023, when the House Republicans in Congress had a debt ceiling bill, and the debt ceiling bill stripped out all of the credits for the 45Q and the 45Z, the CO2 credits. I know this to be true because the two guys that wrote the bill are my former staff in their jobs after I left. And they wrote the bill to strip those out. The entire conference said, good, we're for that. We're all going to be together on the debt ceiling bill. And then at 2:30 in the morning, it was on a Wednesday morning, in that room is the four member in the speaker's office is the four members of the Iowa congressional delegation. And they are, I say, figuratively speaking, pounding on Speaker McCarthy's desk to restore those credits for the CO2 boondoggle. And they had the votes to kill the bill if they didn't get what they wanted. And so McCarthy restored those, put them in the bill. My staff had to write them back into the bill, my former staff, and then and that bill passed 217 to 215. It was pretty clear those four votes were all it took to kill the bill. So that's what's going on there. They're in the whole Iowa congressional delegation, and then it's on site. It's on Simon Conway's radio too, if anybody wants to check that out.
Yeah, I have a couple more questions. I think just to top off and almost end the conversation on the CO2 pipeline stuff with Randy, because right now he's going around telling people he's been clear from the beginning, no eminent domain for private gain. He's been clear on that. Well, I'm looking at a December 1, 2021 column in the Fort Dodge Messenger that he wrote. And it the headline is Carbon Capture Will Enhance Ethanol Industry and Support Iowa's Corn Growers. There's two words in there that you're not going to find. Eminent domain. Um, and you can copy and paste the text from this article into any AI thing that you want to, and it's going to tell you whoever wrote this is not saying they're against eminent domain for the carbon capture pipelines. So I just want to throw that out there. And if you're somebody who's basically said, these are going to produce opportunity to accelerate ongoing efforts to reduce the carbon intensity. Um, First of all, the you could talk about this probably for another hour. But the premise of this idea is just silly to begin with for the carbon capture pipelines. But to have this out there that you wrote in 2021 and then say you don't understand why people don't know that from the beginning you've always opposed eminent domain for this, it's because there's no record of it. Unless you know something I don't.
Well, we know where the support has come. We know that he was recruited by Bruce Rastetter. We know that Bruce Rastetter has poured, I'll say, hundreds of thousands of dollars coordinated from the group of donors that he controls or influences poured into his campaign. There's no way they're going to support a guy that is going to block their project by being governor and imposing this eminent domain. I would take you back to the caucus in 2024 when Vivek Ramaswamy ran for president. He said publicly that a top member, a top voice in the Republican Party in the state of Iowa had called him, or talked to him at least, and said, "Come to Iowa, run. If you're coming to Iowa to run for president, talk about anything you want to talk about, but don't talk about the CO2 pipeline." That told Vivek Ramaswamy he needed to talk about it. That's why I endorsed him for president, because Trump wouldn't answer, DeSantis wouldn't answer, Haley wouldn't answer, and we had people out across the state trying to pull that answer from them. Where do you stand on this? So that's how much influence I think comes out of Bruce Rastetter. It takes some money to get a candidate to endorse and support a project you want. But I've never been in a place where I saw someone have so much influence that they could keep a candidate from talking about a topic that they want to keep a lid on. I think that's why Randy Feenstra is not on the debate stage, too, because part of his directions are don't talk about the CO2 pipeline, but you can say you're for eminent domain against opposed eminent domain for private gain, but then that'll be couched later on if he's governor. And Summit is positioning themselves to become a common carrier, and they're trying to claim that CO2 will become a commodity, and they could potentially pass a constitutional muster if they can redefine their project. They're seeking to do that, even as we sue them now, Jacob.
Yeah. So another thing that I wanted to ask you about, because you have experience with this, is Randy Feenstra took $1.4 million that he had raised, more than that, actually, from his congressional campaign and gave it to his gubernatorial campaign. So I really think that the other opponents are missing the biggest line of attack that they could run with on this and sell it to the White House like this. Randy Feenstra raised $1.5 million for the U.S. House of Representatives. Instead of giving that money to Zach Nunn or Marionette Miller Meeks or David Pouch, whoever the nominee is, to defend those two U.S. House seats in Iowa, he took that $1.5 million for himself for a race he didn't raise it for to run for governor, And that very easily could, if he's the nominee, cost us the seats in the first district and the third district, which then could cost us the Republican majority in the U.S. House,
Mm.
which then could lead to Donald Trump fighting off impeachment for his last 2 years in the White House, as opposed to leaving a legacy for the American people. And I really think that the his opponents are missing the boat because that should get to Trump and that should kind of upset Trump and perhaps get Trump to now. Let's be honest, some of his endorsements lately have been terrible.
Mhm.
But it should get Trump to think twice about Randy Feenstra being governor because clearly he raised that $1.5 million for the U.S. House of Representatives. He's keeping it to himself to become the governor. And that could be the difference between a Democrat controlled U.S. House and a Republican controlled U.S. House. Don't you think they're missing an opportunity there?
Oh, I do think you're missing that an opportunity. I had cast that through my mind, but I had not put that in those steps the way you've described. Although most of the cascading effect of a Feenstra loss for governor translates, in my mind, also to losing congressional seats in Iowa and losing the majority down the line. I'd point out that Feenstra was raising money for a congressional seat at the same time he was raising money for the governor's race. He had a fundraiser in Sioux Center while he was still raising money. While he was raising money for governor, he'd been doing that for some weeks or months, and he had a fundraiser for his congressional seat in Sioux Center that raised a bunch of money and put that into the congressional coffers. So he had it coming in two hands at the same time, both hands at the same time. And I looked at the law, and my look at it said you can't do that. But I had lawyers tell me, well, no, it's been done before. There is a way to maneuver that. So I didn't go any deeper into that. But it's still, to take that money that was raised for one purpose, use it for another when you've got people that need that help here in this state. Now, where he is, I'm talking to a lot of Republicans that say, I can't vote for Randy Feenstra. They say to me, I'll vote for Rob Sand before I'll vote for Randy Feenstra. I won't say that. I don't think I get myself to vote for a Democrat for governor, and even under these circumstances, but I won't say I can vote for Randy. And you all know why that is. So I don't need to go into that any deeper. But what you're talking about with the cascading effect of this, $1.4 million would make a big difference in those two seats, for example. And and then also the message that you can raise money for two races at the same time, but you can only be on one ballot. I can do that. I couldn't look people in the eye and say, hey, write me a check in case I decide to back out of the governor's race. I'll have some money in my congressional account. That's what that really was.
I imagine that it's easier to raise money for the U.S. House because the amount of people who have an interest in what happens in the U.S. House will be kind, is just much bigger and much more significant. Um, I guess than probably the field of people that want to donate to the next governor for Iowa.
Well, on the Ways and Means Committee, that's the biggest fundraising committee that you can be on. I steered away from all of those that raise money because I wanted to make a difference. And there's votes that come up from the time of that fundraiser in Sioux Center and the time that he leaves Congress in January. So yes, that door is open to raise money just to influence how he votes the rest of his congressional term. I see that, but I don't think it's right. You
The
should be
other
voting your conscience anyway. How does anybody get to
Right.
hand you a check and influence the vote? I'm falling into this situation where I'm just equating dollars with votes, but every candidate's not like that. Every congressman's not like that. Many of them have principles that are
Yeah.
not for sale.
Sandy Wilson's watching, and she said after this past week, the candidates need to slam Randy for voting in favor of a procedural move that effectively halted a proposal requiring the public release of congressional sexual misconduct and sexual harassment investigation records with redactions for victims and witnesses. Um, Now, I suppose the problem with attacking him on that is then you also have to attack Ashley Henson and Marionette Miller Meeks and Zach Nunn on that. If we're being consistent,
Yeah.
how many people are going to go vote for Ashley Henson but be upset about this vote when it comes to Randy? It's the same vote that they took. Um, what do you think? What do you think of that line of criticism?
Well, it's valid. We had that issue come up when I was in Congress too, and I didn't know that there was a slush fund out there more or less to hush fund, slush fund, for people that had that kind of allegations against them. And the argument is, well, there's people will use those allegations to attack a public figure, and we need to solve that before it damages the reputation of the Congress. I say, no, just play all your cards face up. Let's fight this thing out. I had them. There was an outside organization. No, it was organized actually by legislation pushed by Nancy Pelosi, an outside ethics group, not the House Ethics Committee, but another one. I've forgotten actually the acronym they went by. And they started ethics charges against me, not over anything sexual, but they said I had political information on my congressional website, and so they did the same thing to Michelle Bachmann and Louis Gohmert. And Louis and Michelle hired lawyers to fight that all off. And I just said, subpoena me. Let's fight this out. And then, well, they can't. They didn't have subpoena power, but the ethics committee did. I said, then refer it to ethics and they can subpoena me. Well, just come down and talk to us. You want to hear it. And my chief of staff and all were saying, you need to talk to them. And I'm saying, and they want me to change my website. There's nothing on my website that violates anything, and I just stonewalled them. And eventually, they gave up on me because I was standing on a principle, and that's what we need to do is let the sunlight hit everything, fight it all out, stand on principle. The public may have to make an adjustment to understand what's going on for a little while, but eventually the truth will come out, and we'll adapt to it. I think also when I first ran for a state senate, I'd only been sued 4 times in my life, and they were all just during that congressional or that state senate race. And they attacked me for being sued. Well, people were suing me because I was a candidate. And so I fought them all off. And after the election, all of those cases were settled for whatever I had offered them or less. I didn't pay $1 more to anybody, but they do attack you in lawsuits, as I know from even more severe personal experience. But just face it and fight it off, be honest about what you do, and eventually it emerges.
Yep. I really think the best line for them to go with is the 1.5 million that he raised for U.S. House and now is choosing himself over the country. Because
Hmm.
it's very possible that 1.5 million, uh, if he's the nominee, I would bet today that Zach Nunn loses and potentially the first district congressional seat goes to Democrats too. That's just the gut feeling that I have. Could be wrong, maybe wrong. But that $1.5 million could be the difference between a Republican U.S. House and a Democrat U.S. House.
Well, and we lost a bunch of seats in 2018 in the midterm elections then. I was the only standing Republican left out of that, and then I was attacked by the Republicans right after that, which for a while it took me a long time to figure out what that was about. But I think you're right in the cascading effect of this. And if I were in his shoes, my ambition would not to be I got to be the nominee for governor and lost the seat, and the cascading effect put Donald Trump up for impeachment charges for the next 2 years and more. I think that cascading effect is very rational, and I've thought that through along the way. I didn't connect the $1.5 million that you did, Jacob, but yeah, we need to add that to it, and they need to make that point.
Yeah.
Maybe he can just write that check now.
It's pretty, it's pretty dangerous. When you let Rob Sand waltz to re-election in 2022 because the Republican Party of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, whoever, didn't like Todd Halbert. So Rob Sand is the only Democrat who survives, wins by a couple thousand votes, and now here we are. It's almost like there's a part of me that says this is our own doing and we kind of deserve it.
Well, it surely was the case in that auditor's race back then, and they shut him out. Whenever they do a Republican event, they made sure he wasn't on the stage. He didn't get to stand in the pictures with them because I don't know why they didn't like him, but they didn't like him, and that is the consequence for that. We could have had the what would it be the what's the word for the fivefecta?
Yeah.
And all the executive offices in the state, and then also supermajorities in the House and Senate. And there's something also with that, though, Jacob. That what comes with those supermajorities is if you're letting the leadership dictate to the supermajorities what they're going to pass, then we end up I'll say, getting crossways with the people of the state of Iowa. And I guess I'd come up to the edge of why we're at this impasse now in the state legislature, and that's why.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? Yeah. Now, have you officially endorsed anybody, or are you kind of just, this is my analysis, this is what I think. You four guys need to be adults, sit in a room, figure this out.
Well, I haven't officially endorsed, but I'm moving in a direction and I'll say a strong direction. And I don't know if it's I think I've indicated so in this conversation here this morning, but for me, I've been this fellow that when I tried to look over the horizon, and I made point after point over my legislative career of things that needed to happen. Build a wall, for example, the heartbeat bill, and another one. It goes really on and on. I'm the author of the birthright citizenship bill that's been now argued before the United States Supreme Court. I'm the only one in Congress that stood up against the Obergefell decision and the gay marriage piece of that. There's no constitutional foundation for that. So I've always looked at those things, and they told me when I was elected, you need to go pick one thing and work on it your entire career, and maybe you get to move it just a little bit before you either get beat or retire or die. And I looked at the whole smorgasbord. I went after everything. And still, those things that I was on 20 years ago are emerged today now. The DEI, the woke part of this thing, the diversity is our strength blather. I've never accepted that. I want a governor that has that kind of vision that can see over the horizon from 2026 on, as I get credit for seeing over the horizon from, say, 2002 on. And there is really only one that has that vision. I think that's Zach Lane. And the culture of Iowa and back to our roots, that inspires me. I want to see that message. Our culture goes into the cities too. Our wealth comes from, all new wealth comes from the land. And you can mine it in a quarry or in a mine, or you can seine a few fish from the sea. That's the only exception. The rest of everything else comes from under the earth or the surface of the earth and the crops that we raise in the field. That's the new wealth. Then we add value to that. So it goes from the land to the farms, and then from the farms to well, maybe the grain elevator, but to the smaller towns, the neighboring towns, and then to the cities. That's where our wealth goes. It's all tied together in this state more than any other state in the union. And so I want somebody that understands that, that's going to take on these ag quasi monopolies. And I don't want somebody that's taking money from Chinese and 100% Chinese owned Syngenta and then posing themselves as the one that's protecting us from Chinese ownership of farmland in Iowa. That's Randy, by the way. So I see Zach Lane as this guy that's got this vision. And I think he's got the ability to implement it. And I'd like to see him pull the other candidates in and say, we can become an administration here that can get these things done in this state. That could be inspiring to the state of Iowa. And it could actually turn the tables on what we're seeing happen here. Put the people of Iowa in control of the people that are running the state rather than the people with the checkbooks in control.
Yeah. All right. Congressman King, I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. I know we had a lot of people watch. I'm sure we'll do it again sometime. There's some topics that people brought up in the comments that are going to have to be for another day
That'll
because
be
they're going to be
interesting to
longer
me.
conversations. Yep. All
All
right. I
right.
appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jacob.
You
Appreciate
bet.
you.
See ya. All right. We should be done with the live stream. Stop recording.